Okay, morning gents. Welcome to this week's PSHE lesson. We're going to be talking about mental health. It is Mental Health Awareness Week, so happy Mental Health Awareness Week. A lot of things that you'll see around school this week will be discussing mental health, specifically in men as well. And I'm very lucky to be joined by Mr. Goldberg this morning and Mr. Lane, who are going to talk to you about their mental health, what it means to them, what they've experienced as they've gone through their life. So sit back, relax, and there'll be a few questions at the end of these interviews to chat through with your form tutor and the rest of your form. Enjoy. Mr. Goldberg, welcome.
Hi.
Okay, so first question, please. What do you define as a mental health, or what do you see important when we talk about mental health? What do you see it as?
I think mental health is often described or defined as something only when it's in its negative context. I think mental health, like physical health, is something that you always have, and it's something that you should look after the same way you might go to the gym or you might go for a run, so looking physically after yourself. There are a lot of ways that you can look after your mental health, whether that's obviously things like kind of speaking to a friend, whether that's just generally living kind of for yourself to some extent. I think you can make personal decisions that are good for you, and so long as you are kind of looking after them the same way you would look after your physical health. Like I said, mental health isn't something that you only have when it's negative, it's something that you have all the time.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and boys, I think mental health, as Mr. Goldberg says, we all have one. So it's really important that we know that, and we know what to do when it's good and when it's bad. Mr. Lane, welcome. Happy Mental Health Awareness Week. Thank you for doing this short interview along with Mr. Goldberg. First question then, what do you see as mental health is? Why is it important? And when did you sort of first realise that you had a mental health?
Thanks for having me. My understanding of mental health is that it's like a maintaining of a balance, maintaining of an equilibrium in your head, psychologically, and emotionally. But they are very different things. The way that you go about your daily life does affect your mental health, but the way that you lead your life is also a bigger picture as well. So it's not just what you do day to day; it's what your thoughts are in terms of where you're going and where you've been and how they've affected you as to become the person that you are.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you, sir. So next question. Can you talk about your experience with mental health? Any times that you've had highs, lows, or any times that you think that your mental health has been bad? If you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences on that,
No, of course.
That'd be great.
I think naturally being a teacher, I think it's quite a bipolar routine. You have kind of periods of the year when you're really on during term time, it's quite intense. You might be suffering from things like kind of sleep deprivation, but you also have the periods when you're on holiday where you know you can relax a bit. So there are times when that kind of contributes to kind of like highs and lows. Personally, kind of my story is quite interesting. It's quite unique, having lost my mum when I was 9, my grandma when I was 7, and my grandpa more recently. I think statistically I probably shouldn't be where I am. Also didn't know my dad growing up, so again, statistically I think I shouldn't necessarily be in the current situation I am, and I'm very fortunate to have a very loving family, a very strong support network, which not everyone is lucky enough to have, and I think that has contributed to not poor mental health, but when it has kind of declined or whether I have had lows, I've been able to bounce back from it because I've had that support network. I think in the last kind of 3-4 years, specifically since I've kind of started at Fulham Boys, whether it's things like kind of relationships that have ended, or whether it's work-related stress, or whether it's kind of factors outside of school, there are a lot of times where I go back to thinking a lot about losing my mum when I was young, and whilst I was a very happy, quite confident, quite outgoing young man, I didn't think that I necessarily explored that when I was younger. There was nothing to suggest that I needed help, and it took till I was probably 26, 27 for me to realise that actually it was something that I needed to talk about more. So kind of about 2 years ago now, so kind of the September before COVID, I undertook a process of having kind of weekly counselling. Not because I necessarily felt like I wanted to harm myself or anything severe in that sense, but there were certain emotions that I was feeling, certain kind of stresses that I wanted to work through that I felt, whilst my family were very supportive and loving, I needed something a little bit more objective, a little bit more impartial. And it got to that point where I wasn't afraid to make that decision, but also I felt empowered by the fact that I owned the decision to go into counselling myself, which was something that I really took a lot of pride in. And I got to a position where, when COVID and lockdown 1 happened, I was actually in the strongest mental position I'd been in for probably a couple of years. And through COVID 1, or lockdown 1 rather, with my 2 housemates at the time moving out, I lived by myself for 5 months, and I thrived. I didn't need that kind of constant reassurance that I've often looked for from other people, because I was so much stronger in myself, what I was aiming to achieve personally, what I was aiming to achieve professionally, and those kind of worries about abandonment to some extent. That's what I genuinely think it boils down to, having lost my mum at such a young age. I didn't feel anymore.
Thank you. Question 2 then, what highs and lows have you experienced with your mental health? And what was the impact it had on you sort of throughout your life?
So I'd say that there's 4 main areas for me. One being having, I'll start with, as the role as head of sport here, having a good career in sport, having some really good highs of achieving some really good level of rugby, the wins in rugby, and then I would say that was again a massive low for me. I retired when I retired at 30, and that was like a massive hangover for me in terms of the way that I felt about myself. My social life had changed. The person that I had kind of defined myself as for the past probably 10, maybe even 15 years as being, rugby being the main mainstay in my life, was no longer there. So I kind of had to really readjust to that. It was, as I said, it kind of made me think, well, what am I going to throw myself into next? Like, what is my main? What does define me? And everyone has that. Like, everyone has a major thing that they do have for something that defines them. But mine was rugby. Before that, then as well, I'd say that I had a profession of faith as a Christian when I was 12. That went all the way up until I was about 19. And I would say that I didn't believe everything that the Bible said from then, really. But it was when I was younger, I'd say that I definitely had I really understood mental health then, due to the fact that I was scared of the devil. And that was a major factor in me being a Christian, so to speak. It was very much like I didn't want to go to hell. I didn't want to be outside of God's grace, and I did enjoy having Christianity as a mainstay. So again, I'm saying like the psychological mainstay in my life, but also the emotional crutch of Christianity was, I wasn't naughty or really. Surprising, but the Christianity was something that I channeled myself through, and it was very much like I shared it with my mum. My mum was a Christian, is a Christian. My dad's not, so it was like I didn't play rugby on a Sunday, and like the thing of that was that my dad wanted me to, my mum didn't want me to, but so that was like a kind of, it was a pull, and Christianity up until I was 19 won. So I think that definitely, reflecting on that now, is something that I battled with, and again, it sounds, you're dealing with, but everyone has their own individual mental health that they deal with, and that was what I did. I had Christianity on one hand, rugby on the other. They were the two things, the most important things in my life, along with my family, and they didn't work together. So that does, it causes you to have, to question yourself, which is always a good thing, but it's also, it can be a negative pose on that. I'd say that coming here is one of the things that coming to Fulham Boys School was a massive jump and a leap of faith. Mr. Ebenezer often says to the year 13s that are leaving now, there wasn't a school. We didn't have this building. We didn't have. I didn't know any of the teachers that were going to be there. We had 1 year group coming in. I was coming in to set up a sports. Set up all the sports that has happened at the school, and from nothing. Like, there was no one here that had done anything before me. So it was, that's like a kind of, it's a leap of faith. People say that use that as in a sort of Christianity term, but it was definitely a leap of faith. That I was moving from a settled school where I had lots of different opportunities to be able to be part of a network and a family as well. Like, some of my best friends are still from that school. I met my partner from there as well. So I think that coming into Fulham Boys School was a massive thing. And then, as most of you all know, I have had babies, not me personally, as you can see. But yeah, that's like a massive thing as well. Like the fact that I suppose they have taken over the urge of rugby in a way, because you literally just go for it 24/7. The whole of my weekend, I think I sat down for an hour and a half to watch Match of the Day. Not at 10:30 at night, because I was firmly in bed by then. But I watched it from 2 o'clock till 3:30 when it was downtime on Sunday afternoon. That was it. That was the only downtime I had the whole weekend. And that's not a moan, but because that's what I want. But the pressures that go along with that, of wanting to provide for your family and be the best dad you can be, is definitely something that resonates loud and clear when you're in that situation.
Yeah, cool. So sort of all of that coupled together. I mean, at times, has it ever been at a point where you felt really low?
Yeah.
And if you were if you did feel low, what can you explain sort of what it felt like? Because you got really big highs there, but obviously with that are some big lows, like you're having babies, no rugby anymore, the faith. Can you explain what the lows?
Yeah, I think that there was. So it was about 2 years ago. Well, no, it was about 2.5 years ago. My son was six months old, and it kind of as I said, all those different things, like not having the spare time to yourself, of being able to go and have a game of rugby with my mates, and then go out and have a socialise with them afterwards, or the work commitments that I have here, and then being at home and that, and then just kind of it made me feel like I needed to reevaluate a lot of things in my life. It wasn't just so much that there was no specific pressure, I don't think, but just amalgamation of all the different parts that I just spoke about then. Was I depressed? I look back and try and diagnose. Now that I've come out of, I'm not as bad as I was then. But I think I was depressed. There was a lot of things that I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, you don't know what that means because you just feel sad. And that was what I would say to, I said to you, didn't I, when I opened up to you before. And I just felt sad. Like, I was anxious about all the different things that were going on in my life. But I just felt sad. And I didn't know why. There wasn't anything that I particularly, I had a good job, I owned my own house, got a car, got a lovely family. I got really good, parents and friends, but I just felt sad, and there wasn't something quite right in me. So I did seek help. I went to the doctors. They put me on a case of antidepressants, anti-anxiety tablets, and then on top of that, then they took the edge off, but I realised that that wasn't quite enough. So I did actually seek cognitive behavioural therapy, and had a 10-week, paid for a 10-week course, and then that kind of opened me up a lot. I'm not sure if I closed properly from that as well, because I could only afford 10 weeks because they are quite expensive. But then I did actually go on to then onto the waiting list with the NHS and had a few more from that as well. But yeah, like the fact that I opened you up, and you go from where you were, like who you are, why you think those ways, why you actually want to, like what you want for your life, and how you actually what you see as your future is kind of clouded. And as I said, the thing that I would say is that there's a dark cloud over the top of me, and I look at my son running around, well not running around, but scooting around on his bum and laughing in my face, and I just didn't get joy from that. I was just, as I said, sad, and there was no I didn't know why that was the case. So talking that through with being a therapist was brilliant for me. I thought there was nothing that I didn't tell her, and that was that's something in itself is pretty hard. Yeah. Because you don't really talk to yourself about those things.
Yeah.
There's some things you definitely suppress.
Yeah.
And she got me talking, and everything just came out, and I did realise that there were certain triggers in my life that I needed to deal with. I won't say what they are, but there are certain things that there's certain things that I need to hold an open palm and just say, well, yeah, you can affect me, but I'm going to do this or do that so that they don't affect me in the same way. They always will affect me, because that's me, that's who I am. But it's how I allow them to affect me to an extent where I don't become sad over them anymore.
Yeah. Cool. You mentioned, so as an old rugger bugger, and now head of sport.
Yeah.
You mentioned how that you didn't really know whether you were depressed or not, and then obviously someone professionally has said to you, you need to take these meds. How did that sort of conflict or marry up with, I'm a rugby player, I'm a head of sport, this isn't what that image looks like? Was that at all difficult, or?
Not at that point, because I was at breaking point.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of like why I would say that why Mental Health Week is so important, is you don't want to get to that stage.
Yeah.
Where you crack. And I cracked. I got to a stage where I wasn't able to function in the same way that I function now. And I needed to, once I sought help, it was easy, because I just like the weight had lifted.
Yeah.
But before that, that's very much the case, is that I can sort this out.
Yeah.
It's my famous saying, I'll sort it. And so many people, you're laughing at it because you've heard it so many times.
Do you think that, so take it back a few steps, do you think that there was a certain point where you realised, oh yeah, I've got to go and get some help? Or do you think was it more of a gradual process? Because as you said, you took yourself to go and get some help. There was no one telling you what to do, and you should be proud of that. But is there anything where you were like, okay, yeah, now I've got to?
I think gradually, over kind of having quite a long-term relationship when I was quite young, from kind of like 15 to 20, so my first girlfriend I had for 5 years. Whilst obviously you grow a lot up in that time, and kind of we're very amicable now, I think with a lot of those relationships that ended, whilst at the time it didn't affect me greatly other than the relationship ending in itself, I didn't see the pattern of how it led to me thinking a lot about my mum afterwards. And I think it took for a relationship later on to occur that didn't kind of end well, that led me to going to get the help. So whilst it was gradual and I saw it every time, it was that one point that I thought, leaving work, going home and ending up on the phone, like crying down the phone to my godmother. And I had no idea why I was crying. I could obviously pinpoint it to a couple of events, but I couldn't rationalize the emotions I was feeling. And that's what kind of led me to think I need that little bit more objective support.
That's really interesting. And when you took on your therapy, if you don't mind me asking, what sort of thing do they help you with? Could you explain a little bit about that process for anyone who might think that they might need a bit of help?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I went through the local kind of borough, so Borough of Ealing counselling services. They were really helpful. It took a little bit of time to kind of get the first consultation, which I know obviously kind of mental health services at the moment are quite stretched. But once I started the process in this September, I was having weekly sessions where initially it was just about the therapist getting to know me, and they were very reassuring to say that I wasn't necessarily stuck with them. If I didn't feel it was a good fit for me, I could request a change or something different. But my therapist initially just kind of got a lay of the land. My story, be it kind of more complex personally, or even someone else might have slightly a lesser complex story, but you know what is normal. I think it's a very difficult thing to define. And it led to kind of more in-depth conversations. Within the first few sessions, I probably did cry quite a bit. Again, it was the fallout of that relationship ending and me thinking about kind of almost feeling abandoned like I did when I lost my mum. But at the time I was 9, it was business as usual. And I'd always dealt with personal setbacks, emotional setbacks, professional setbacks as I was just another day in the office, I'll be fine the next day, and just kind of putting it behind me. That's fine, but not always necessarily dealing with the root issue. And that's what this therapy allowed me to do. It allowed me to explore those causes and really try and develop those coping mechanisms moving forward. And I'm such a stronger person for it. And I think COVID happening at the time was a real kind of acid test for me personally of how I developed emotionally, developed kind of mentally, and I did really well. I think a lot happened to me within that year as well, that I do believe that things kind of happen for a reason. And starting therapy then, within that year with COVID, losing my grandfather, finding out who my dad is and meeting him for the first time, you know, there's a lot of different factors at play that my therapist was hugely supportive of, and I'll forever be thankful for her. But additionally, it was something I'm most proud of taking on, whether it's from like kind of younger sporting endeavours and success to professional teaching successes. But personally, it was a proud moment to undertake it for me.
Yeah, cool. Do you think that, was there ever a point where you were like, oh, I'm a macho man, I'm an alpha man with big muscles and play rugby? Was there ever a time where you felt that you had to live up to that standard?
Personally,
in terms of mentally, I suppose, but in terms of how you act and how you speak and what you share and what you don't share.
Me, no. I think I've always been quite an open book. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm very happy to share with people, and sometimes maybe slightly oversharing. I never lived up to that. I think the support that I did therefore, however, get from my family, my godmother, when my mum passed away, was a problem shared as a problem halved, and I've never not spoken about anything. Whilst what led me to going through the process of therapy was, I think, slightly more under the radar, but I hadn't identified it, so that's why I think it was harder. Anything to do with kind of girlfriends when I was younger, to professional setbacks, I've never shied away from talking about it. I think at one point growing up, I was in my room, my godmother was in her room, because we all shared a house, my mum was in her room, and we had 2 lesbian couples in the other rooms as tenants. So I was growing up kind of being brought up by 6 very strong independent women, and I'd never seen kind of emotional frailty or vulnerability as something to shy away from. I'd always spoken whilst going to like an all boys sixth form, which was very kind of sport focused, and that kind of environment where people perhaps were seen as weak for talking. Personally, that was never me. I did see it in others. I've never lived up to that. If externally it might come across, that's not me deep down. I'm quite mushy.
No comment. No comment. Cool. So could you briefly just mention what sort of strategies you now have day to day after having your counselling process?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is not, or considering what I'm placing importance on. I think a lot of things in previous relationships was, if my girlfriend was happy, I was happy, and I gave nothing to myself. So when those relationships ended, I had nothing to give back to myself. So it's not necessarily being selfish, but prioritizing number one to some extent. I think you live with yourself for however long you are alive, and to not look after yourself in terms of the decisions you make, both personally and professionally, will have a detrimental impact over time. So I've definitely not been afraid to make decisions for my own well-being, more so.
Mm-hmm.
Day to day, it's about knowing what I can and can't control. I think naturally I have always wanted to control quite a lot of things, and whether it's personal or professional, allowing myself to, one, prioritise, but two, to not get bogged down by factors that are, like I said, out of my control. And I think it's very easy to kind of overanalyze when something's gone wrong and really breaking down the different factors, but it's about being grateful every day, being thankful for what goes well. I think just trying to stay as positive as possible. I think it is very easy to focus on the negative as opposed to the positive, and I've got so much, be it work, my colleagues, my friends, sports, my family, that every day I know I'm lucky to have.
Cool. Now we are a department of 7 sportsmen, males with some rather big personalities.
Indeed.
Across the board. You mentioned that you obviously like sharing, sometimes oversharing, but do you feel that in an environment where there are 7 of us and we, as I said, big personalities, was there ever a point where you didn't feel like you could talk about it because we were that group of men who don't talk about their mental health? Or did you feel that you were in an environment where you could share?
I think our department, we can. I think we are obviously close friends outside of school as well. I think historically that kind of macho exterior, that kind of boys don't cry kind of thing, I think one, nationally, and I think especially within the kind of societal circles that I mix in with my friends, that is very much being broken down at quite a quick pace. Mm-hmm. If like we think when we were back to uni with like kind of different sports teams, like things like kind of initiations and stuff like that, that was very much the norm, and that kind of lad culture is definitely being broken down, not just kind of in the workplace. I think I'm sure there are isolated, I hope, examples where that still exists, and they need to obviously be broken down as well. But I think it's about that kind of authentic self. I think whilst we teachers wear different caps every day, you're pastoral, you're a teacher, you are a support worker, you are kind of athletics teacher, you might end up in a classroom doing cover, you wear loads of different hats every day. But within our department, I think generally we are very authentic to each other, and that builds trust. And I think that opportunity to speak about your emotions when you need to, or even when you don't need to, but know that you can, is all about kind of trust. And when there is no personal trust, that's when issues occur. And I think when I haven't shared with maybe friends of previous who you drift apart as life goes on, where I maybe had an opportunity to share with them, I chose not to, because there was probably that lack of trust. And with our department, we're very lucky that we all trust each other.
Yeah. I say it to my family. You know, as I said, there was one that happened with my family that we booked to go away during a half term, and I booked the whole holiday. You know, there was my partner's side of the family, my side of the family, 2 kids, 5 adults, no, 6 adults, 6 adults, 5 adults and me. And there's an instance of that is that I had a car, I booked a car, but stupidly my driving license didn't have enough. It was still in date, but it didn't go over, and I completely lost the plot. Like, was really just anxious about myself. Like, really, this was before I went and got therapy and stuff like that. I was letting everyone down. Everyone was relying on me. No one cared. We just got a taxi, I got the money back when we got back, because it was because we went through the insurance.
Yeah.
Me because I've got to sort everyone out, and I've got to do this for people, and I've got to do that for people, and I've got to make sure that this all happened. It was just, I imploded, and I was just like, I couldn't speak to it. I was really sad. I was cried, and I almost like just kind of didn't really know what to do, but no one else cared about it.
Yeah.
But I did so much that I almost like, sat there. I sat there like that and just, oh no, best everyone's holiday. No, you haven't. But that was what I believed.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, those sorts of things. And then I'd say that, like I said, I alluded earlier about my faith, and I think that made a massive impact on me when I was growing up. Is that I didn't, we preach, like, at Fulham Boys School it's preached that that God's a loving God, and but I always thought of like the God is an awful God, and that is in the Bible. The God of the Old Testament was my God in a way. So I'm not Jewish, but the God of the Old Testament, where it was fire and brimstone. If you don't do this, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, do this, do that. That's the kind of why I lived by the Ten Commandments. And if I'd almost be like totaling up my sins during a day, even though I believe Jesus had taken them away, but I was still inflicting that pain onto Jesus dying on the cross, that my sin was worse than anyone else's. And that's what, the mentality that I had through my upbringing and my, which, as I said, did lead to that sort of person, just rely on me, because of wanting to not fail. And again, we know as sportsmen, there's two very different types of people in terms of the way that we talk about sports. So you've got personality types. There's need to achieve and need to avoid failure. Need to achieve was very much like what I did in sport, but then the rest of my life was need to avoid failure. And that kind of conflicting type of emotional and psychological thoughts are, they do come out in certain ways.
Yeah. You obviously mentioned that you had treatment.
Yeah.
The medicine and the CBT. How did it help? But also, what strategies do you now have in place that help you counteract the fact that you are sort of head honcho and you think people rely on you? Well, they do, but some of the times that they don't, and you don't always have to feel that anxiety. What sort of strategies do you have day to day?
So there's two that I do. There's one that I practice pretty much every single morning as I'm having my coffee before I leave. Is that what can I do today that I can actually affect, and what are the things that are not in my control? They're the two main. That's the two. So what I do, the thing that I was taught. I don't do it every morning, but I do it probably once a week. Is there's a circle of the things that I can affect that week. So whether it be work or family or leisure time, whatever that is nowadays, friends, what I can affect that week in terms of how I approach those things. So those, and then outside of that is the things that I can't affect. So what I rely on other people to do that I can't make other people see the same way, or whether it's Mr. Ebenezer, or whether it's or whether it's one of the coaches at sports afternoon. I can't control the way that they think, even if I try. So it's very much like which is what should happen, because everyone should be thinking for themselves. But yeah, so those that's the major strategy that I try and put in every single day. And then there's another one where a tree, and this is proper therapy stuff now, boys. There's a tree, and you've got the trunk, and obviously, and you've got the roots, and you've got the branches, and you've got the leaves. Now, the different compartments of that make the whole tree. bear with me, okay? So you've got your roots, so where you've come from. You've got your trunk, which is pretty much like the main stability parts of your life. So who they are, your mum, your dad, maybe your family, my kids, some of my work colleagues, my friends. Then you've got, outside of that then, like the branches that come off the tree, which are the different scenarios that you actually find yourself in with those different people. The leaves then are the things that affect the tree, because you've got to have sunlight in order for the tree to actually still grow. Now I know water comes from the roots as well, but just hear me out. Okay, so it's got to be photosynthesis happening for the tree to actually grow. Now the leaves are the smallest part of that. So the different parts, the leaves are the different parts of your life that allow you to grow as a person. So, but the tree doesn't, all the tree does is grow, and the leaves will then, so that you'll be able to expand your life, because you'll grow more, there'll be more leaves, and therefore you'll be able to actually, be a, growth mindset as a person will increase. Now that's a properly cognitive behavioural therapy sort of thing. So I'm happy to share it with people in a much better way, but that's the way that you've got to be able to think about it. Is that as I said, there are different things. You come from something, you are something, you're a product of that. Whether you want to be a product of that is up to you, but other people will affect you being a product of that throughout your life, and you've got to be able to balance those different people, whether you want them to affect you positively or if you discard them because they are a negative, they affect you negatively, psychologically.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Lane, thank you very, very much. Gents, a massive thank you from Mr. Goldberg and Mr. Lane this morning. It's not easy for them to talk about their experiences with mental health, so massive thank you, Mr. Lane and Mr. Goldberg, for sharing that. I'm sure they won't mind if you have any questions or if you'd like someone to speak to. I'm sure they'd be more than willing. All of us as a partner, as we said, we like to chat. So if you're ever struggling at all with any mental health, I know all the P, but just all members of staff at FBS are there for you boys. So remember, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. Think about your own mental health. And I hope you've learned something listening to Mr. Goldberg and Mr. Lane this morning. Have a good week, boys.